Mm. They never saw me coming. That's the thing about being the responsible one. People mistake your silence for weakness, your patience for ignorance. My brother and his wife had been living in my father's house for 3 years, spending money they didn't earn, making plans with assets that were never theirs. They thought I was just the quiet sister who kept her head down and paid her bills on time. They had no idea that 2 years before my father passed, he sat across from me at a corner table at Denny's and slid a manila envelope across the table. "Keep this somewhere safe," he said. "Don't tell anyone." I didn't. "My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed CPA. I manage financial audits for mid-sized companies across 3 states, and until 8 months ago, I spent every other Sunday at my parents' house in Greenfield, Ohio, eating my mother's pot roast and pretending not to notice that my brother Marcus had slowly turned that house into his personal kingdom. I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand something before we get to the part where everything fell apart. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my father's memory to be respected. Those two things just happened to look exactly the same in the end. My father, Robert, was a quiet man. He worked 32 years as a civil engineer for the county, never missed a mortgage payment, never bought anything he couldn't afford twice. He believed in documentation. He believed in preparation. He used to say, "Rachel, the best time to handle something is before it becomes a problem." I thought he was just talking about roof gutters and car maintenance. I didn't understand until much later that he had been talking about Marcus. Marcus is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was charming in a way that exhausted everyone around him. Teachers loved him until they didn't. Coaches kept giving him second chances he never earned. My parents, especially my mother, had a blind spot for him the size of the state of Ohio. Every failed business venture, every bounced check, every time he needed just a little help to get back on his feet, my mother would look at my father with those eyes and my father would open his checkbook. I watched this happen so many times I stopped counting. When Marcus was 28, he married a woman named Diane. I want to be fair here. I tried to like Diane. I genuinely tried. She was polished in a way that felt rehearsed, always complimenting things in your home right before suggesting how you might change them. At the wedding reception, she pulled me aside near the dessert table and told me how much she admired that I was so focused on my career. The way she said it, soft and sweet, made it sound like a consolation prize. I smiled and went back to my champagne. For the first 2 years of their marriage, Marcus and Diane lived in a rental apartment 20 minutes from my parents. Then my father had his first heart attack. It was a mild one, the doctor said. A warning. My mother panicked. Marcus and Diane offered to move in and help with the house. My father told me privately that he had reservations. He was 63, fully capable, and the house had 4 bedrooms and a paid-off mortgage. He didn't need help, but my mother wanted her son close, and my father loved my mother more than he loved his reservations. So Marcus and Diane moved into the largest guest bedroom and began making themselves permanent. Within 6 months, they had repainted 2 rooms without asking, replaced the kitchen faucet fixtures with something Diane called more modern, and convinced my mother to cancel the cleaning service she'd had for 11 years because Diane doesn't mind doing it herself. The cleaning never actually happened with any consistency, but that's beside the point. What mattered was that piece by piece, my parents' home was being quietly reprogrammed to belong to someone else. I visited every other Sunday. I noticed everything. I said almost nothing, because my mother was happy having Marcus nearby and my father had asked me, more than once, not to stir the pot. "Let me handle it my way," he said. I respected that. I should tell you now, that restraint was the hardest thing I have ever done. 2 years before he died, my father called me on a Tuesday morning while I was at my desk between client calls. He asked if I could meet him for breakfast that Saturday, just the 2 of us, at the Denny's on Route 35, where we used to go when I was in high school. I said of course. I thought he wanted to talk about his health, maybe update his medications, maybe complain about Marcus in a way he never let himself do at home. When I got there, he was already in the booth, coffee in front of him, a manila envelope on the table next to his reading glasses. He looked calm. He looked like a man who had already made his decision and was now simply communicating it. We ordered. We talked about my work for a few minutes. Then he put his hand flat on the envelope and pushed it toward me. Inside was a deed transfer. The house on Clover Street. The house I grew up in. The house Marcus and Diane were sleeping in at that very moment. Had been transferred into my name 18 months earlier. There was also a secondary document showing that my father had opened a separate account in my name only, with $85,000 in it, funded gradually over 5 years through careful, quiet withdrawals and his own retirement savings. There was a letter, handwritten, 4 pages. I won't share all of it here, but the part I keep coming back to, the part I read probably once a month even now, said this: I know this isn't fair to ask of you. I know you'll want to confront it. Please wait until I'm gone. Your mother needs peace while I'm here. After I'm gone, protect what I built. You're the only one I trust to do that. I folded everything back into the envelope. I held it together through breakfast. I cried in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Then I drove home and put the envelope in my fireproof safe behind the winter coats. I didn't tell anyone. Not my best friend, not my therapist, no one. My father lived for 2 more years after that breakfast. They were good years, mostly. His health stabilized. He and my mother took a trip to Savannah for their anniversary. He coached a little league team one summer just because a neighbor asked and he couldn't say no to kids. Every time I visited, I would watch Marcus pour himself a drink from my father's liquor cabinet, settle into my father's recliner, and hold court like a man who owned the place. I would sit across the room and drink my iced tea and think, not yet. My father passed on a Wednesday in March. Heart failure. He went quietly, at home, which is exactly what he wanted. The week after the funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolence cards, and my mother not sleeping. Marcus appointed himself the point person for everything, talking to the funeral home, accepting deliveries, greeting visitors. He was good at being visible in a crisis. I handled the actual paperwork. The trouble started exactly 11 days after we buried my father. I was at my mother's, my house, I should say. Though I still can't fully think of it that way. Helping her sort through some of my father's files, when Marcus and Diane came home from somewhere with that particular energy they had when they'd been planning something. Diane was wearing new boots. I noticed because she had definitely not owned those boots the week before. Marcus sat down at the kitchen table and announced, in the tone of someone sharing good news, that he and Diane had spoken to a financial advisor, not my father's, someone new, and they were looking into options for the estate. He used the word estate like it was something he'd just discovered. He talked about the house, about possibly refinancing against the equity, about a business idea Diane had involving short-term rentals. My mother nodded along the way she always did when Marcus spoke about money, which was with cautious optimism and no questions. I set down the folder I was holding. I asked Marcus very calmly what financial advisor he'd spoken to. He gave me a name I didn't recognize. I asked if he had any documentation about what they discussed. He said it was preliminary. I said that was fine, and that before anything moved forward he should know there were some things about the estate he might not be aware of yet. He smiled at me the way he had been smiling at me my entire life. The smile that meant he thought I was being characteristically cautious and characteristically irrelevant. Rachel, he said, I've got it handled. You don't need to worry. I smiled back. I said, okay. I drove home and called the estate attorney my father had been working with for the past 4 years. What happened over the next 6 weeks was, from the outside, very quiet. I had a meeting with the attorney. I had a second meeting with a different attorney, one I hired myself, just to have everything reviewed independently. Both of them confirmed the same thing. The deed transfer was clean, properly recorded, entirely legal. The account was in my name. My father's remaining assets, including his pension payout and a small investment account, were directed by his will to my mother for her lifetime and to me as executor. Marcus was listed in the will for a $15,000 bequest, a real number, a meaningful number, but nothing else. Meanwhile, Marcus and Diane were not being quiet. They had told several relatives that the house would stay in the family, which everyone understood to mean them. Diane had apparently told her mother they were planning to renovate the garage. Marcus had called my father's longtime neighbor, Mr. Belatos Patterson, and mentioned casually that he was looking into rental income for the downstairs space. My mother, I learned later, had been told by Marcus that these conversations were just exploring options, and that everything would be handled properly. No one told my mother the house was already in my name. I need to be honest about why. I was not sure how she would react. My mother loves Marcus with a completeness that has always been a little painful to witness. I was afraid that if I told her before the formal reading, Marcus would find a way to reframe it, to make my father's decision look like a slight against the family, an act of favoritism, something to be challenged or grieved. I wanted her to hear it officially. I wanted there to be no room for revision. The estate attorney scheduled a formal meeting. I requested that all relevant parties be present: my mother, Marcus, Diane, myself, and the attorney. Marcus thought this was the reading of the will. He arrived wearing a sport coat. Diane had clearly gotten her hair done. They sat down across the conference table from me, looking like people expecting to receive something. I want to tell you about the moment the attorney finished explaining the deed transfer, because it's the moment I've replayed more times than I can count. Marcus went through several expressions very quickly. Confusion first, then a kind of recalculating look, then something I can only describe as the face a person makes when the floor disappears under them and they haven't started falling yet. Diane's hand, which had been resting on Marcus's forearm, went very still. My mother said, "Robert did that?" The attorney said yes. He explained the timeline, the documentation, the account. He explained that this had been recorded with the county 2 years prior, and that all transfers had been handled through proper legal channels with no ambiguity. Marcus said, "He never told me." I said quietly, "He told me." There was a long silence. Marcus looked at me across that table, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years, and I could see him going back through every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every time I had sat across the room drinking my iced tea and said nothing. I could see him understanding in real time that the silence hadn't been indifference. It had been a choice. He said, "You knew this whole time." I said, "Yes." Diane started talking about contesting. She used the word undue influence, which told me she had done at least some research between the meeting invitation and that morning. My attorney, who I had brought and who had been sitting quietly to my left, explained in very measured terms the standards required to contest a deed transfer and the documentation that existed in support of the transfer's legitimacy. Diane stopped talking. What happened next over the following weeks was harder than the meeting. Marcus called me 4 times the night after the attorney's office. I didn't answer. He texted our mother things I won't repeat here, framing himself as the victim of something my father had done, something I had enabled, something the whole family should be angry about. My mother was upset, genuinely, deeply upset, but not in the direction Marcus expected. She was upset because she hadn't known. She was upset that my father had carried this quietly for 2 years. She was upset in the way that people are upset when they understand too late that someone they loved had felt they couldn't speak freely. She called me the Friday after the meeting. We talked for 2 hours. She asked me why my father had done it this way. I read her the relevant part of his letter. Not all of it, but the part about waiting. The part about her needing peace. She was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, "He always protected everyone from everything, even from him." She did not defend Marcus in that phone call. That was new. I gave Marcus and Diane 60 days to find alternate housing. I worked with my mother's attorney to ensure her right to remain in the house for as long as she wanted was formally documented. I established a household account for her maintenance and expenses. I hired back the cleaning service, the same one actually, and they were very gracious about returning. I repainted the 2 rooms Diane had changed back to colors my mother chose from a sample book she'd had since 2019 and never gotten to use. Marcus found an apartment. He and Diane moved out on a Tuesday. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. What I want you to understand. And I say this because I've read the comments on videos like mine, and I know some of you are going to say I should have acted sooner, that I should have confronted Marcus the moment he started talking about refinancing, that I should have told my mother the minute I got home from that Denny's breakfast. Is that timing as its own kind of strategy? My father understood that. He spent 2 years making sure every document was clean, every number was recorded, every possible challenge was anticipated and closed. He didn't act out of anger. He acted out of love, and he acted carefully. I tried to honor that. I also want to address something directly, because I think it matters. I don't hate my brother. I know that's probably not what anyone wants to hear. But I grew up with him. I know that somewhere inside the man who sat across from me in that conference room wearing a sport coat and expecting to receive something he hadn't earned, there is a person who was loved so completely and so uncritically that he never learned what it felt like to build something from nothing. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth as I understand it. He made choices, so did I. My mother still lives in the house on Clover Street. She calls me on Sunday mornings now, early, before I'm fully awake, and we talk about nothing in particular. Her garden, a book she's reading, a neighbor's new dog. Last spring, she finally used that paint sample book. The living room is a color called Quiet Morning, and it looks exactly right. I visit every other Sunday. I sit in my father's chair now. I drink my coffee, and sometimes, when it's quiet and the light is coming through the window the way it did when I was a child, I think about a man who ate scrambled eggs at a Denny's on Route 35 and pushed a manila envelope across the table, and trusted me to know when to act. I think I got the timing about right, and if you've ever been the quiet one in your family, the one who keeps the receipts, who reads the fine print, who shows up and handles the things no one else will, I want you to know something. Being underestimated is not a disadvantage. It is the longest, most patient kind of preparation. The ones who overlooked you have no idea what you've been building while they weren't watching.